This is the Big Stories Podcast, where we tell the amazing and inspiring stories from across the Big 12 Conference.
I'm your host, Cleon Wall, and welcome into another episode of the Big Stories Podcast. 6 teams are still undefeated in Big 12 Conference play, and 4 of them are undefeated overall. At least 2 of them will not be undefeated by the end of next weekend. But before we get to the biggest storylines of this week, let's get to the top 5 teams of the week with producer Chase Davidson. To explain to people again, our top 5 teams, these are the teams that we say are the top 5 in the Big 12 Conference from this past week. We'll go 5-1. We'll start out with Chase, then we'll go to me. If we have any overlapping, what we'll do is that I'll mention where I place the team. So let's start out with number 5, Chase. Who did you have at number 5?
At number 5, I have BYU in a road test against Colorado. This is a story about a true freshman, Bear Bachmeier, who is frankly, in my opinion, very underappreciated by national media right now. 277 all-purpose yards. His legs really helped BYU win that game. And he's extremely efficient through the air. He's looking like something special, especially for a true freshman, surrounded by a lot of pieces, great pieces. But most fans in Provo, I think, would have much preferred to beat this Colorado team more handily. But BYU walks out with a win over a rowdy Boulder crowd under the lights.
I think Bear Bachmeier is, I don't know if he's underappreciated. I think he's properly appreciated.
Okay.
I think he's done some good things so far. I mean, I'll say he surprised me. But he's done some really good things. Is he wowing you? I guess you could say, yeah, in some ways, yeah.
I think for a true freshman, he is.
Yeah, he is. He is kind of wowing you with his play so far. So yeah, I think he's properly appreciated. That's my opinion. I think he's properly appreciated for being a freshman and being able to lead his team to a 4-0 start. I actually had BYU at number 4. They were down 14-0 early, slowly clawed their way back into the game. Other than CU's quick touchdown in the third quarter, the defense played well in the second half. There's really a lot to like about this Cougars team, but we shall see how good they really are. They're going to play against West Virginia. I think that's a win for BYU. They're then going to play at Arizona. I think that could be a win for BYU. Could be another one kind of like this CU game. Could be close, but I think they could win. And then it's going to get really tough, and it's going to start off with the University of Utah. So I think that they've impressed me so far just because, as you said, they've impressed me because they have a freshman quarterback. Everything else I thought, yeah, they pretty much lived up to expectations. So we'll see how things go. Okay, my number 5 was Kansas State. You might think, why would I pick in my top 5 a 2-3 team? I think Kansas State, they're the team that showed up this week that we anticipated prior to the season. And I say that because I think a lot of prognosticators thought, I don't know if they're going to win the conference, but I think they're going to be at the top end of the conference. And they've just really struggled this year. Against UCF at home, they looked solid. I'll just say that. They looked solid. They finally got Dylan Edwards healthy. He ran for 166 yards and a touchdown. Avery Johnson didn't turn the ball over and passed for a couple of TDs. Both were nifty shovel passes. And as Chris Kleiman said, it was a breath of fresh air that they didn't allow their opponent back into this game. So sure, the defense gave up some big runs to UCF, but they looked like a decent middle-of-the-pack team. They're now 1-1 in conference. Who cares that they could lose to Baylor or possibly TCU at home before taking on Kansas in the Sunflower Showdown? It's K-State's best win of the year, so that's why I picked them number 5. So who was your number 4 team, Chase?
My number 4 team is Utah, with a huge bounce-back win this week after getting, humiliated at home last week. They scored 48 in Morgantown versus West Virginia. And Devin Dampier really impressed me. He was pretty efficient through the air, 21 for 26. And despite West Virginia, you can have your thoughts on them, on their lackluster. Both of the sides of the ball have not looked great so far. But this was absolutely necessary for Utah to gain some essential ground in creating solid offensive drives. This was really their problem last week against Texas Tech. And they really improved. I don't care if it's against West Virginia. Really big ground that they've got.
I didn't know where to place Utah. I had a hard time because I'm just like, I want to place Utah in the top 5. And maybe it's imperfect, but I actually placed them at number 2. And the reason why is I had a hard time deciding who to take out because I put Kansas State in, and I think that's the natural. You're like, wait, what? Kansas State? Why did you put Kansas State in there? And it's just like, well, they're looking better. That's why I wanted to put them in there. So it's like, so which team am I going to leave out? Well, just spoiler alert, I'm going to leave Iowa State out. So I put Utah at number 2. I fully expected the Utes to win this game. That was not a question. I was wondering how they were going to look in winning the game, and they looked really good in their 48-14 victory over West Virginia. I guess what impressed me was their resolve after losing to Texas Tech. I think they would have won the game no matter what, but they came out and they dominated West Virginia. They bounced back. They handled business. Now they get a week off before they take on ASU. So Utah, I put them actually at number 2, even though that game was not, if you were a West Virginia fan, that was not fun to watch because they had no passing game, or pretty much no passing game. It was all running, and they did put some yards up on Utah, but it was late in the game. Utah looked good on both sides of the ball. So I had Utah at number 2. Number 3, who did you have at number 3?
I did include the Cyclones in my ranking here at number 3 because they really needed a dominant win this week, and they got it. Arizona's kind of been like a sizzling sleeper team. Like, okay, is Arizona back this year? They're 3-0, looking kind of good. Iowa State really needed this blowout to essentially justify their top 20, top 15 ranking. I still don't know if I would rank them at number 14 in the country, but they definitely helped themselves justify such a high ranking this week.
No, I get it. They're my honorable mention. They're kind of like Utah. I expected Iowa State to win this game. It was hard to leave them out of my top 5 just because they did win so handily, but I expected them to win the game, and maybe that's why I decided to leave them out. And they're just kind of so efficient right now, and they're so dependable, I guess you could say also. So maybe that's why I left them out. Okay, so you had at number 3, you had Iowa State. At number 3 for me, I had Cincinnati. They drove 75 yards in 1 minute and 16 seconds to put themselves ahead and to beat Kansas. To put up 603 yards of total offense on the Jayhawks is probably the most impressive stat in that game, that they were able to do that. 388 yards through the air. Brendan Sorsby, I thought he was going to be more of a running guy this year, and that's pretty impressive against Kansas. Might not say a lot against Kansas either, but a complete offensive game for the Bearcats. That's why I had them at number 3. Who did you have at number 2?
Yep, right out of my mouth. Cincinnati is my number 2 team, and yes, I was so impressed with Brendan Sorsby as well because after the first couple of games, everyone kind of chalked him up as like, all right, this is kind of a wildcat kind of quarterback. This is a scrambler. This is a guy who really does what he does on the ground. I know Kansas is not the best defense, but he put up 388 passing yards on Kansas on the road. And the way they closed with that unlikely touchdown to win under a minute was just, that showed a lot of maturity in the Cincinnati team that really no one had any look on at the beginning of the season. No one expected the Cincinnati team to be 3-1 with a road win over Kansas right now. And not to mention, their one loss was against Nebraska in a neutral site game that many could argue was not very neutral.
Very true.
And they lost
in Kansas City. Yeah.
And they lost in the final minute of that game.
Yeah.
So Cincinnati is a good team. 1-0 in conference. They have a lot to look forward to. I really like what I've seen from Cincinnati. And this week they play Iowa State at home, and they are the favorite, by the way, in that game.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
That's very interesting. I was also impressed with Cincinnati just because they won on the road. Kansas, I thought Kansas would have all the momentum. Granted, Cincinnati was coming off of a bye, but I thought Kansas had all the momentum. They had actually played a tougher schedule up to this point. They played Missouri very tough. They waxed West Virginia at home. I thought this has all the writings of a Kansas win on it, even if it was just by a touchdown. I'm like, Kansas at home, they're going to win this game. So to see Cincinnati upset Kansas in Lawrence, that was just impressive to me. So yeah, that's why I think both of us had them in their top 5. So I think I know where we're going to both go with number 1. So who was your number 1 team?
Number 1, Arizona State is back on the map. A lot of people kind of put them back. This team, I don't think they got what it takes to win the Big 12 after they lost at Mississippi State, who turns out to be a pretty good team. But with 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter, the analytics on ESPN showed that Arizona State versus TCU, by the way, this is Friday night, had an 11.9% chance to win. They had just missed a field goal, and TCU was getting the ball back with an electric offense. But instead, Arizona State overcomes it. They put up 500 yards in this game on the Horned Frogs. This is a massive bounce-back game. And remember, when you're in a conference like this, just these conference wins is really all that matters. They're 1-0 in conference, or 2-0 in conference, and that's really what matters for these guys. They totally have a shot at the Big 12 title. And I can't believe I'm saying this after 3 weeks of kind of saying, nah, I don't think they got what it takes.
Yeah, they dominated the time of possession. Now, it helps that TCU likes to throw the ball, and they don't have much of a rushing game. So that probably helps. But I think what impressed me most about ASU was just kind of like what you said. They were down a touchdown, 24-17. They come back. They score a touchdown. They then force a turnover, and I could say force a fumble, but in reality, it was just Prince Dorbah taking the ball out of Josh Hoover's hands as he was trying to back up. And then they kicked the game-winning field goal. The defense made it uncomfortable for Hoover in this game. Nice all-around victory for the Sun Devils. A titan of a matchup in less than 2 weeks between the Utes and the Sun Devils. Yeah, that's going to be a really, really good game. And I mean, we're going to have good games in between that time, but still, that's going to be a really good game that everyone's going to have their eyes on. Chase, thanks for joining me for the top 5 teams in the Big 12 this past week. It's now time for the big stories, Big 12 storylines.
Number 5.
2 teams go for 2, and we're not talking about the extra point. Baylor and Kansas State are both feeling a lot better about themselves after picking up conference win number 1. K-State found a good running game with Dylan Edwards against UCF, and Baylor still has one of the best QBs in the conference in Sawyer Robertson. Each team wants Big 12 win number 2, and they don't want to face Big 12 loss number 2 this early in the conference season. I will admit, one of the teams that makes it into the Big 12 title game may have 2 losses in conference play. I'm just not sure any team wants that loss to come in game number 3 of Big 12 play.
Number 4.
What might have been like that song from Little Texas. Okay, maybe not, but when the Big 12 Stories team was putting together storylines for this week, we looked at the Kansas and UCF game in Orlando as a sneaky good one. We thought both teams would be undefeated in conference play coming into their matchup. We were wrong. What might have been. Kansas lost at home to a Cincinnati team who had not beaten anyone of note, and UCF lost to the aforementioned Kansas State team, which had struggled in its first 4 games to pick up a victory. Now Kansas is hoping to prevent a slide in the standings after starting out the year very hot on offense. Meanwhile, UCF is trying to find itself on offense. Sons of UCF podcast host Trace Trylko joins us to talk about the Knights. UCF has played 3 quarterbacks this season. 2 have gone down with injuries. 1 has come back. 1 hasn't really looked good passing the ball. Who's going to be the guy when the Knights host the Kansas Jayhawks coming up this weekend?
That's a very good question, right? During Monday's media availability with UCF football head coach Scott Frost, he was asked about first quarterback Taven Jackson, who left with a AC joint sprain, who then came back. They had cut him out of his uniform, for crying out loud. He was out of pads. His arm was in a sling. He was in a hoodie. He was in the quarterback meeting on the sideline, and then he comes back and plays, but, no doubt sore. So it's going to be interesting to see what, if anything, he's able to do during practice throughout the week, right? So certainly fueled by adrenaline and whatever else they may have given him to get him back on the field. But remains to be seen. Jakari Brown comes off the bench, first pass, an interception. He later throws an 82-yard touchdown pass. He even got dinged with an AC sprain. And left out of this mix is Cam Fancher, the FAU transfer, who emerged during preseason camp to be the starter in game 1 until he was knocked out against Jacksonville State. Finally cleared to practice, cleared to play. It was interesting, though, that he did not come into play. I asked Scott Frost that question. What was the sequence of events that led you to go with Jakari over Cam? And he said, well, Cam just didn't get as many reps during the week. So Scott Frost tends to be pretty direct as you might expect from a head coach during his media availabilities. He said he wasn't being coy. He needs to see how these guys heal up and perform during the week. So we leave the Monday media availability with no clarity, and the quarterback carousel continues on for UCF as they welcome in Kansas on Saturday.
Knights have to be feeling pretty comfortable with the rushing attack, at least after playing at Kansas State. They go for 205 yards on the ground, 119 yards by Miles Montgomery.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is a lot of the runs that have occurred over the course of 4 games of this season, in which the Knights are 3-1, have been long balls, right? They've really broken off big runs, but between the tackles they've struggled, and that has been a question mark in the early going of this season, whether the rush blocking was there, and that continues to persist as a question. And UCF struggled on against Kansas State. Left the defense on the field far too long, missed on some opportunities, especially in the first half. So they need to get some first downs, control the ball, don't leave their defense hanging out there, and they're going to need to get the running game going earlier. So you look at the stats. If you didn't watch the game, you just look at the stats, you go, boy, they're really running the ball well, and maybe there are some struggles there and some question marks on basically a rebuilt offensive line.
Giving up 266 yards rushing to Kansas State, not optimal. I'm assuming that's going to be a point of emphasis heading into this game against Kansas so that the Knights can hopefully make Jayhawks QB, Jalen Daniels, one-dimensional.
Yeah, that sounds easy, right? On paper, it's a little harder to do in practice. As Cincinnati and others have found out, he had a big game against the Bearcats. Of course, that was a loss for Kansas. But UCF had some struggles. Kansas State mixed up two quarterbacks in that first half. They had success with the quarterbacks running, extending drives, getting first downs. UCF is going to have to limit the damage. They're not going to take it away, right? And you don't take it away from Daniels, but how much can you limit the damage that he causes? That's going to be a big question mark because, defenses perform pretty well against maybe some lesser competition. It feels like Kansas State, the best of the bunch with wins over Jacksonville State, North Carolina A&T, and then, of course, Bill Belichick in North Carolina the week prior. So stepped up competition. It was the first road game for UCF. They kind of got smashed in the face there. They got nicked and dinged throughout that first half, and it, wore them down over the course of the game. They're going to have to do better because Kansas is a talented team.
How has this team handled the unexpected death of offensive line coach Sean Clark? I know he went into the hospital in early September, but still, it's got to be tough on this team right now to lose one of their coaches so early in the season.
It's really unimaginable, right? And in the case of some of the players, maybe this is the most significant loss that they've experienced in their young lives, right? Yeah, you look over the history of football and coaching, you don't typically lose a coach, especially at this age, with a current program in season. So difficult. You mentioned early September, a medical emergency had him away from the team. Head coach Scott Frost indicating some positive news coming from the family. They thought there was, trending in the right direction. Then the news coming out on that Monday, coming up following the Sunday night news breaking that he had passed away rather unexpectedly. 50 years old, Sean Clark, leaves behind a wife and two young kids. It's a difficult time. How could it not be emotionally draining on them and taxing on them, and family and, the well-being of people comes first before football, but the football game is still on the schedule at Kansas State. Nobody's making excuses for it. However, difficult to prepare, right? They had a walkthrough scuttled as they were dealing with the grief and the news. And then they have to go through what was one practice, Coach Frost and the coordinator saying maybe not the best practice in the world. And then they stay focused. But were the guys able to give 100%? They may have felt they were giving 100% in Manhattan, Kansas. But, after the week they had, you got to give them some grace and a pass there as they mourned the loss of Sean Clark. It has been difficult for the team. Scott Frost summed it up best when he says he simply misses his friend. It has rocked the program. We'll see the long-term impacts. And again, if you're identifying a challenge for UCF in the early going, it was probably offensive line as they assemble a bunch of new guys primarily out of the portal that with that position, they need to learn how to communicate with one another and really get to know one another in that chemistry. So to have offensive line coach Sean Clark pass after just a couple of games with the Knights, very, very difficult. And it was certainly a challenge going into Manhattan.
Trace, thanks so much for joining us here on the Big Stories podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Number 3.
Oh, so close. CU was up 14-0 on BYU in the first quarter and had a 21-17 lead near the end of the third quarter, but lost to the Cougars 24-21 in Boulder. They're now 0-2 in conference play. Coach Prime is looking for any positive momentum. Will he find it in Fort Worth? Meanwhile, TCU was just as close to beating ASU in Tempe and lost after turning the ball over twice in the last few minutes of the game. Melissa Triebwasser of the Frogs Insider podcast said TCU has to answer some serious questions entering this game.
I think TCU has some serious questions following their loss at Arizona State 27-24 on Friday night. The Horned Frogs went up 17-0 behind a really strong offensive performance and a Josh Hoover masterclass on the first 2 drives, and a defense that was making timely plays and really living that bend but don't break mantra. But from there, it was all Sun Devils. Hoover was under duress. The offensive line struggled both to pass protect and really struggled to get the run game going. The Horned Frogs were without Kavorian Barnes for the second straight game, and Eric McAllister was a late scratch and only played a couple of snaps in the first half, and that certainly didn't help things. Hoover made some uncharacteristic mistakes, struggled to get through his progressions against an aggressive Arizona State front, and his receivers had some drops and some deflections that led to turnovers. Overall, not the cleanest offensive night by any stretch for TCU. And while the defense did what they could, the difference was Sam Levitt's legs and, of course, Jordan Tyson, who may well be the best receiver in college football. TCU's got Colorado coming to town next. This becomes a must-win game for the Horned Frogs to avoid going 0-2 in conference play. This is a team that saw itself as a contender to get to Arlington in a Big 12 championship behind the strength of Josh Hoover in his almost third year of starting. And right now, I think they're struggling to find their identity a little bit. Colorado's on their heels and hasn't played great this season. This could definitely be a get-right game for TCU, who has a really tough October ahead. So I think we'll see Hoover come back focused. This was a short week for both of these teams on Friday night. But the Horned Frogs definitely need to take some time and take a look in the mirror and figure out how they can clean up some of the undisciplined markers that cost them the game Friday night and get back to their winning ways.
Number 2.
Can Cincinnati surprise Iowa State? The team I left off my top 5 teams from this past week can get back into my top 5 very easily. Just beat Cincinnati at Nippert Stadium. The Cyclones are 5-0 and look solid on both sides of the ball. Then there is Cincinnati, who has had a tough time since entering the Big 12, going 3-9 and 5-7 the past 2 seasons. They're now 3-1 on this season, and it looks like they could pick up some Big 12 wins this year along the way. But can they win the big one against the 14th ranked team in the nation at home?
Oh, how your outlook can change in literally 15 minutes of real time. We were actually doing a live post-game show from our sponsor, Martino's. This is Charlie Walter from Chatterbox Bearcats, by the way. Live post-game show, so envision this. We're watching UC pretty much lead wire to wire, aside from the very early stages of the game. They had some massive plays, take away a fumble on the 1-yard line, the only turnover of the game. Cincinnati forces that turnover, and I'm talking Kansas was about to score. It was Cincinnati's 1-yard line. UC had 4 touchdowns called back in the game, but you felt like Cincinnati had a chance to really cement this W, and they just could never put on that exclamation point. And it was Kansas who scored with 2 minutes to go in the game. The bar is already weary. We don't feel great about things, and we watch an improbable drive that took about 15 minutes of real time, and it changed the outlook on the Scott Satterfield era. A huge 37-34 win over Kansas on the road. Gutsy final drive by Brendan Sorsby, who picked up a 4th and 10. Also had 388 yards and a couple of touchdowns in the game. This is the same quarterback that only went for 88 against Nebraska, although he did use a lot more of his wheels against Nebraska. Overall, huge performance offensively for Cincinnati, but now the test is how will their defense hold up against Rocco Becht and the ranked Iowa State Cyclones. Probably the biggest game at Nippert Stadium since Oklahoma in the Big 12 opener. Not probably, definitely. A huge opportunity for the Cats to build on the momentum that they have right now. Iowa State, noon, Nippert Stadium in Cincinnati on Saturday.
Number 1.
The Texas two-step. Now, that's a specific country western dance characterized by quick, slow movements. We might see that a little bit this week in one of the biggest Big 12 games of the week when Texas Tech plays at Houston. The Cougs have scored 125 points this season, while Tech has racked up 208 points in 4 games. So Houston may want to slow down the Red Raiders with sustained drives if they can sustain those drives against a defense that only allowed Utah to score 10 points against it. Let's get the latest on the Red Raiders with R.C. Maxfield from the Red and Black Report.
Texas Tech heads down to H-Town as the number 11 team in the country this week. And really the biggest storyline for Texas Tech is, can they get over that mental hurdle that in years past has really been detrimental to them after winning a big game? Can they prove that this year is different? They've already got that elusive, top 25 win against Utah a couple weeks ago. You have the bye. Now can you focus on an opponent that, doesn't have a number next to their name? And I think Joey McGuire and crew will have these guys ready. Obviously, the biggest aspect on the injury front for Texas Tech will be, does Baron Morton play in this game? It sounds like he's on track to, but that is something to monitor. Will Hammond, as we all know, balled out on national TV out in Utah, allowing Texas Tech to get that 34-10 victory over Utah in Salt Lake City. But I'm watching for the defensive line in this one. You saw Houston go up to Corvallis and really eke out a win against Oregon State, a team that both of the Cougars and the Red Raiders have commonality in terms of their schedule. Texas Tech obviously played Oregon State at home and beat the Beavers pretty thoroughly there. And Houston went up to Corvallis, struggled a little bit. But this Texas Tech defense is all kinds of legit. They made Devin Dampier look pretty pedestrian, and he looked pretty dang good out in West Virginia. But the biggest thing that I'm looking for in this game is, can Texas Tech continue with this momentum and prove that this year is unequivocally different, not only because of what you did in the transfer portal, but because of how talented you are on the gridiron. It's going to be a big one for Texas Tech as it stands right now. They're 11.5-point favorites. I think that line is more than fair. And down in H-Town, it may not be a home field advantage for the Cougars. There's going to be plenty of scarlet and black in the crowd for that one.
Now on to our top 5 quarterbacks in the conference. Number 5, Bear Bachmeier of BYU. 179 yards passing and 2 TDs, 98 yards rushing. Most importantly, he led his team back from a 14-0 deficit on the road at Colorado. Number 4, Baylor Sawyer Robertson. 24 of 35, 393 yards and 4 TDs. It seems like he's always going to be in the top 5. Probably not, but it just seems like he is. Number 3, Utah's Devin Dampier, 21 of 26 for 237 yards and 4 TDs against WVU. Number 2, ASU Sam Levitt, 27 of 39, 291 yards and 2 TDs. Also had 62 rushing yards and a TD. This guy is at a level 10 during the entire game. He plays with so much passion. And number 1, Cincy's Brendan Sorsby, what a game. 388 yards and 2 TDs. On his team's game-winning drive, he passed for 56 yards, including an 18-yard completion on 4th and 10. Honorable mentions, Kansas State's Avery Johnson, Houston's Connor Wegman, who brought his team back to victory, and Kansas's Jalen Daniels, 445 yards through the air and 4 TDs in the loss to Cincy. All right, time for our big man on campus. It seems we always give this award to someone on offense, so this week I'm giving it to ASU defensive lineman Prince Dorba, who had 3 sacks against TCU, including the strip sack that led to the Sun Devils' game-winning field goal. Prince turned out to be a king, or at least the Big Stories big man on campus. That's going to do it for the Big Stories podcast. We'll be back soon with more inspiring tales from around the Big 12. I'm your host, Cleon Wall. Big Stories is a production of BYU Radio.